This is Yamato, a well-known delinquent in the neighborhood who frequently gets arrested and taken to the police station for brawling. Unexpectedly, today, a young man who calls himself a model student named Teru arrives looking for Yamato. Teru suddenly kicks at Yamato, but he dodges and counters with a punch. Impressed by Yamato's skills, Teru asks if he wants to get out of there. Upon leaving the police station, Yamato asks Teru what he wants from him, but Teru does not reveal it just yet. Later, they come across two suspicious individuals hiding in a house by the roadside. These individuals set their sights on a girl walking down the street and use some sort of magic to possess the body of their chosen target. Returning to the main character, Yamato arrives home and unexpectedly glances at an old family photo. Suddenly, he sees an image of his younger sister being engulfed by flames in the past. Although he has accepted the truth that his sister died in an accident, a part of him still harbors doubts that the incident might have been caused by someone. Shortly after, his classmate Kyoko visits to bring him food. Initially, he says he isn't hungry, but when he sees his favorite dish, he reluctantly accepts it. Kyoko tells him that he shouldn't keep getting into meaningless fights, as his excessive pride will only bring trouble upon himself. She then decides to leave and mentions that she has been feeling something strange lately while walking through town as if the entire town were fake. However, thinking it sounds too absurd, she brushes it off and leaves. Later, Yamato goes out and runs into a familiar face on the street. Meanwhile, the girl who was possessed suddenly notices Yamato and realizes that he meets the conditions to become a warrior, someone she must eliminate. She prepares to approach and stab Yamato with a knife, but hesitates, fearing she might be targeting the wrong person. However, her partner is certain that Yamato will soon become a warrior and pose a threat to them, so he insists that they should eliminate him immediately. Just as she is about to stab Yamato, he is suddenly spotted by his rival, Ryugo. Ryugo taunts him about getting arrested, but Yamato retorts that if he hadn't been arrested, Ryugo would have been the one beaten up. Shortly after, the two run into Teru, who unexpectedly invites them both to follow him. Yamato is surprised that Teru also invited Ryugo. Following Teru into an alley, they encounter a gang of thugs. Realizing that Teru had set them up, Yamato and Ryugo, despite often being at odds, decide to fight side by side. They quickly take down the gang, but suddenly, the defeated thugs transform into robots. Now, the robots turn on them and begin fighting back. Yamato and Ryugo soon realize that the robots have analyzed and predicted their fighting styles. However, Yamato turns on some music, grabs a metal pipe, and charges in with relentless attacks. The two fight in an erratic rhythm, making it impossible for the robots to analyze their moves. Eventually, they manage to defeat the robots. However, Teru has kept one last robot in reserve, which he now sends into battle. The robot swiftly launches an initial attack, kicking both of them away. Teru mocks them, saying that, in the end, they are just a couple of street thugs. But Yamato, enraged, lunges forward and thrusts his metal pipe at the robot's face. The robot dodges, but this gives Yamato an opening to escape. He jumps from one corner to another before leaping in and delivering a final strike that destroys the robot's head. Teru claps, congratulating them on passing the test. He then leads Yamato and Ryugo to an arcade, but behind it lies a secret base. Ryugo assumes that Teru is taking them to an underground fight club, but Teru reveals that this place is actually a long-forgotten underground fortress. Inside, they discover a robot, and Yamato is unsure why Teru brought them here. Suddenly, the fortress commander, Minami, appears to explain everything. She declares that their carefree lives are officially over, as both of them will now become warriors in the battle against extraterrestrials. Minami then reveals that 3 years ago, Earth was annihilated by aliens in just 2 days, wiping out 99% of the human population. Earth has been transformed into a habitat for extraterrestrials, while humanity is now forced to live in a small shelter outside of space. All humans have had their memories erased to forget what happened, ensuring they can continue living in peace. To recruit those capable of becoming warriors to protect the world, this fortress has installed numerous cameras around the town to monitor the residents. These chosen individuals will have to pilot these robots to fight against the aliens. However, Yamato quickly refuses, stating that he is not a soldier and has no reason to fight for others. In response, Teru decides to restore Yamato's memories to give him the motivation to fight. Minami agrees and orders the soldiers to take Yamato away. Yamato is then brought to Duke, the one responsible for returning his lost memories. Yamato is shown the day when the aliens attacked. At that time, his parents and younger sister were aware of what was happening and were anxiously uncertain about what would come next. Yamato steps outside to see spacecraft filling the sky. When he turns back toward the house, it suddenly explodes. He desperately rushes to save his sister, only to witness an alien crushing her underfoot. Overcome with fury, Yamato recalls everything and swears never to forgive those extraterrestrials. Meanwhile, he hears that Minami is being summoned to the command room because the enemy is attacking again. Yamato decides that he will fight them. Duke then asks Ryugo if he wants his memories restored as well, but Ryugo refuses, unwilling to go through the same experience as Yamato. When Yamato reaches the command room, he is surprised to find a familiar elderly woman there. It turns out that many of the people from town are also here, working at this facility. The elderly woman informs them that the squad deployed on the battlefield is in grave danger due to the overwhelming enemy numbers. Minami decides to send Yamato into battle, transferring piloting knowledge directly into his and Ryugo's minds to skip the usual training process. The two, along with Teru, quickly set out and enter the robot. According to Teru, this robot is humanity's strongest machine, as it requires 3 operators. Yamato is in charge of movement and actions, Ryugo handles defense, while Teru manages the radar and tactics. Duke remains uncertain whether these 3 kids can truly accomplish anything. The group is then deployed onto the battlefield, taking their first steps in combat. Although they stabilize their movements, they quickly realize that they are too slow on foot and won't reach the front line in time. Minami suggests splitting the robot into 3 separate units for transport. Yamato is surprised to learn that the robot has this capability. Teru explains that the robot can divide into 3 parts, allowing each of them to pilot individually. Once separated, they will be transported more quickly to the battlefield. Meanwhile, out on the battlefield, soldiers begin to fall one by one. The last remaining squad is being cornered by thousands of powerful enemy forces. Their captain tries to encourage his men, telling them to hold on, and if they make it out alive, he will treat them to a feast. He then pulls out his gun and charges into the enemy ranks. Although their resistance is commendable, the sheer number of enemies is overwhelming. The captain is shot down, and the rest of the team is gradually wiped out. Just at that moment, the 3 main characters arrive in time to provide backup. They soar high into the air, preparing to manually reassemble the robot mid-flight. Yamato will serve as the core, while the other 2 must merge with him. None of them are sure if they can pull it off since they have never practiced it before, but whether they can or not, they have no choice but to try. Yamato asks Minami for guidance, but she insists that he must execute it himself, as he will be the one controlling the robot's movements. Ryugo wonders what the organization will tell his mother if he dies here. Teru explains that if they die, the organization will alter the memories of everyone who knew them, erasing any trace of their existence. The only way to leave behind proof that they ever lived is to survive and fight. The 3 of them ascended to the required altitude and then cut off the fuel supply to begin their descent. Yamato's torso section was released first to stabilize the formation, followed by the arms being attached, then the lower body, and finally the 2 swords. However, 2 enemies were flying nearby, preparing to attack. This gave Yamato an idea to eliminate them without direct combat. He instructed Teru to get the thrusters ready. Then he waited until the two enemies were about to open fire before signaling Teru to activate the thrusters, allowing them to dodge and trick the enemies into shooting each other instead. However, they had now run out of fuel for the thrusters, making a safe landing impossible. The entire base was worried that Yamato's team would crash straight into the ground. But to everyone's surprise, Yamato managed to land the robot on its feet without any damage. He then informed the captain to retreat and let him handle the remaining enemies. The captain found it hard to believe that a single robot could take down so many enemies and chose to stay and continue fighting. However, Minami had faith in Yamato's team and relied entirely on them. The base sent another weapon for Yamato's robot. He quickly piloted the robot forward to catch it, and the delivered weapon turned out to be a gun. The enemies fired at Yamato all at once, but he swiftly jumped to evade their attacks. He began firing back, but as he gained confidence, enemy shots started hitting him in rapid succession. The system suffered damage, forcing an emergency repair process. Minami was unsure what had just happened, but Yamato apologized for his momentary lapse in awareness. He then decided to unleash a powerful attack, though it would only affect a single target. Minami initially thought Yamato was panicking, but seeing his composure, she realized he had a plan. Yamato gathered energy, then shot straight into the sky. After reaching full charge, he launched a devastating strike downwards, creating a shockwave that eliminated a significant number of enemies. However, the remaining forces fused together into a massive giant, completely ignoring Yamato's team and heading straight toward the shelter. Yamato's team had to find a way to pursue it. He drew one of his swords and stabbed it into the ground, activating the thruster in his right hand to spin at an incredible speed while using the sword as an axis. Once he reached maximum velocity, he tilted the sword, launching himself forward like a missile to pierce the giant. However, Teru warned that to defeat it, they needed to strike its core. Yamato then activated the sword's special technique and charged in, unleashing an X-shaped slash that cut straight through the giant's core. Everyone rejoiced in their victory, and Minami believed that after this battle, the enemy would start taking them seriously, that humanity would not simply accept extinction. Meanwhile, the alien leadership began noticing humanity's resistance. Some advisors questioned the queen about why she had tasked the princess with assassinating the warriors below. The queen explained that her daughter was still too soft and clung to the idea of coexistence with humans. To awaken her, the queen decided the princess needed to taste blood. Yamato, for now, returned to his artificial daily life, keeping the truth a secret just like everyone else to protect ordinary people from suffering the same fate as him. He reunited with Kyoka and walked to school with her. That day, their class welcomed a new transfer student, Ryuji. Later, Yamato and his teammates went to the elderly woman's restaurant for dinner. The city continued to function, carrying its secrets within. In the following days, Kyoka kept feeling that there was something mysterious about this city. Meanwhile, a serial killer emerged, moving through the city wearing a cloak to hide their face. They also seemed to know the exact locations of surveillance cameras, committing murders right in front of them as a direct challenge to the organization. At the same time, Minami was feeling exhausted and had to inject a special drug to stabilize her body. Teru visited her after she failed to answer emergency calls. Suddenly, she collapsed, forcing Teru to catch her. Meanwhile, at school, there was a teacher who was extremely popular among the female students. A red-haired girl spoke up and invited the teacher to go out over the weekend, but he declined, saying he already had plans. At that moment, Yamato reunited with Ryugo and left the school. Around the same time, a curly-haired boy who was frequently bullied at school appeared. The red-haired girl remarked that she had been bullied even worse in the past compared to him. Yamato then heard from Ryugo that an office worker had just been murdered, and that person had also been a pilot like them. Meanwhile, the alien princess had begun following Yamato, planning to assassinate him. After Yamato and Ryugo split up, the princess quickly closed in to carry out the assassination. However, just as she was about to strike, Yamato spotted a coin on the ground and bent down to pick it up, causing her attack to miss. She continued to tail him, attempting multiple times to assassinate him, but each time something obstructed her. Finally, when she found a perfect opportunity, Yamato suddenly heard a voice and turned around only to come face to face with the princess. He called her Asuna, revealing to her the name of the body she had possessed. When he asked why she was following him, the princess's attendant told her to use the excuse that she had fallen in love with Yamato. She went along with the suggestion, leaving Yamato bewildered by the unexpected confession. At that moment, Kyoka happened to pass by and was shocked, completely confused as to what was happening. She had no idea when Asuna and Yamato had grown so close, if anything. When had they even become this familiar with each other? The attendant realized he had made a mistake, but, having already committed to the lie, urged the princess to continue acting as if she truly loved Yamato. She followed his instructions, but just then, Yamato was summoned to the base, leaving the two girls behind to talk among themselves. Yamato attended a meeting with the pilots, where he learned that 3 pilots had already been assassinated in a similar manner. Minami suspected the killer was an alien, believing that someone in the base had been possessed and had stolen pilot data from the system to carry out the assassinations. After the meeting, Teru asked Minami if she was okay, but she told him not to worry about her and to focus on tracking down the assassin. Meanwhile, the alien princess was forced to leave Asuna's body as signs of rejection had begun. Returning to her original form, she realized she needed to complete her mission soon and return home. Her goal was to earn her mother's recognition and eventually become the next queen. Asuna, now aware that she had been possessed, hurried to inform Yamato, knowing that he was the target of the entity that had taken over her. At that moment, Yamato's team was urgently summoned to deploy their robots into battle. Still unclear about the mission, Yamato was introduced to Dorothy, an AI created by Duke to assist him with navigation and combat strategy. Dorothy explained that Yamato's objective was to eliminate long-range enemy units as they were targeting a mining site essential for sustaining the shelter. Yamato's team rushed to the battlefield and encountered the enemy. As expected, the opposition consisted solely of long-range units, so the base quickly sent a gun for Yamato to use. However, he first took to the skies to eliminate the airborne enemies before turning his attention to the long-range artillery units on the ground. The problem was that these artillery units continuously fired while retreating, preventing Yamato from closing in. His gun did not have enough range to hit them. To make matters worse, all the enemy units suddenly fused together, forming a massive cannon that relentlessly fired at Yamato, forcing him to dodge repeatedly. But dodging forever wasn't a solution. Dorothy suggested using the robot's most powerful long-range attack, though it was extremely energy-consuming. Yamato didn't fully understand how the attack worked, but he followed Dorothy's instructions. The robot activated a massive cannon in the center of its body, but several smaller cannons separated from the main enemy unit to obstruct Yamato's aim. Ryugo suggested firing recklessly, but Teru reminded everyone that they only had one shot, so they needed to aim carefully. Just then, the captain arrived with his new team to provide support. With their assistance, Yamato finally had a clear shot. Once the energy was fully charged, he fired, but instead of hitting the core of the giant weapon, his shot landed on one side, making everyone think he had missed. In reality, Yamato had redirected the shot horizontally, taking out all the enemies in one shot. Teru believed this was the reason they chose Yamato because of his unpredictable strategic mind, not just his fighting skills. He brought a new, hard-to-read approach to combat, which was essential in facing the enemy. The next morning, Yamato returned to school and encountered Asuna again. She asked him to stay away from her at all times. Meanwhile, Teru returned home and continued his normal life, but he realized that the entire town was a lie. The people living there were simply those who had lost their families, paired together to create new families. At the same time, the alien princess possessed Asuna's body again to follow Yamato. Yamato confronted her, asking what she wanted since she had told him to stay away. The princess realized that Asuna had warned Yamato, so she decided to seize the opportunity and kill him right then and there. However, she tripped and dropped her knife, forcing her to flee. Kyoka, who had been watching the entire encounter, was now sure that Asuna had feelings for Yamato, and she realized she needed to do something about it. The princess's knife was later found by Yamato's teacher. Yamato then encountered Ryuji, a new student who had recently transferred to his class. Ryuji was chasing after a cat he had adopted, which led him to a research facility where his father worked. Ryuji's father was a scientist with the goal of turning his son into the best pilot in the base. For years, Ryuji had been forced by his father to train, but he had resisted because he couldn't meet his father's expectations. Despite Ryuji's resistance, his father found a way to force him to comply. He directed Ryuji's cat deeper into the research facility, luring him to follow. Unaware of his surroundings, Ryuji inadvertently entered the cockpit of a robot. His father immediately locked the cockpit and sent Ryuji into battle. Yamato, meanwhile, called Asuna to meet with him. He wanted to make it clear that he wasn't interested in romance at the moment and asked her to stop following him. He told her that he had found his own purpose in life and was fighting for it. Upon hearing this, the alien princess, who had taken over Asuna's body, began to doubt whether the two races could truly coexist. The queen, her mother, had once told her that the two races could never live together, and she would not forgive her if she continued to defy her wishes. Back with Ryuji, he was forced onto the battlefield and made to fight. However, Ryuji kept trying to find a way out, which made the enemy target him. The impact of the attack killed his cat, which Ryuji blamed on his father. His father, however, insisted that the cat's death was due to Ryuji's refusal to fight. If Ryuji had fought, more people would have been saved. While Ryuji might not have caused the deaths, he could still save many others. Years ago, Ryuji's father had lost his entire family in an alien attack. He was working in a military hospital at the time when he discovered signs of life from Ryuji, who had been on the brink of death. The doctor worked tirelessly to save him and succeeded in bringing Ryuji back to life. From that moment, Ryuji became the driving force for his father's survival. Ryuji was the only one who survived among hundreds of others, and his father believed that Ryuji was a miracle. However, over time, Ryuji withdrew from the world, refusing to show any emotion. His father tried to force him out, but Ryuji resisted, unleashing his latent abilities. This led the doctor to a new discovery: humans have untapped potential, and the current catastrophe was a sign that humanity needed to evolve in order to survive. As time passed, some of the children in the facility began to rebel and attempted to escape. Ryuji used his powers to stop them. The next day, when the doctor checked, he discovered that when these children used their abilities, they developed tumors. The more they used their powers, the larger the tumors grew. After today's checkup, the tumor had disappeared, and the doctor's colleague believed that Ryuji was the one who had eradicated the tumor. On the battlefield, the soldiers began to struggle against the enemy, while Ryuji decided to turn his hatred into motivation to fight, activating his abilities. With his awakened powers, Ryuji was able to control a robot by himself, unlike Yamato's team who needed 3 people to pilot one. Ryuji quickly destroyed dozens of enemies and realized what he had done. The doctor believed that Ryuji had defeated the invaders, and now that he had this power, it was his duty to fight and protect humanity. The doctor then visited the base to meet Minami, asking her to accept Ryuji and his research into the organization. Minami argued that experimenting on humans was inhumane, but the doctor countered by pointing out that she had fueled Yamato's hatred to make him fight. However, the president of the organization accepted the doctor's research and allowed him to become a part of the organization. Meanwhile, Ryuji had gotten another cat to protect, believing that this new cat would make him stronger. At the same time, Yamato was called by his teacher, but the princess stepped in to speak on his behalf, allowing him to leave. She knew that the teacher was also an alien like her and revealed that Yamato was her target. However, the teacher, who hated being interrupted, was about to engage with the princess, but her bodyguard intervened and resolved the situation. Yamato then ran into the boy with the curly hair again, who was being bullied. Some people took pity on him and came to his aid. Yamato's group passed by and decided to help, with Yamato and Ryugo driving away the bullies and catching one of the remaining culprits. Ryugo recognized the face of this bully, who had once refused to give up his seat to an elderly woman on the bus while he was on his phone. Ryugo wanted to teach him a lesson, but the bully called for reinforcements, so Ryugo decided to find their leader and teach them all a lesson. However, Teru had already handled the situation. When they arrived at the hideout, they discovered that the leader of the bullies was Jun, the red-haired girl from Yamato's class. She appeared kind at school, but was actually a cunning person who lured others in. She sent her lackeys to attack, but Yamato and Ryugo quickly dealt with them. Ryugo, wanting to settle a personal score with Jun, went after her, but he kept getting embarrassed while fighting a girl and eventually got punched in the face. Ryuji suddenly showed up, causing Jun to stop fighting. She decided to explain everything. She revealed that she had been bullied in the past because she was too cute, but the bullies helped her enter a beauty contest, which she won. She became famous, and the bullies became her bodyguards, protecting her from those who used to bully her. The reason they were running around the city was because she had asked them to investigate the strange occurrences in the city. She also suspected that the 4 boys were hiding something from her, because, from time to time, the 3 of them, excluding Ryuji, would disappear without explanation. Ryuji covered for them by saying that the 3 boys had been sneaking off to watch adult films, so the others decided to play along and let it go. At that moment, an announcement came through, and all 4 boys made excuses to leave. They all headed to the base, where they would get into 2 robots to enter battle. This time, Yamato's instructor was a different woman. After landing, the command centers sent 2 transport robots to take the group to their destination. Now, they didn't need to assemble in mid-air, saving time. Their mission was to destroy the enemies attempting to sabotage humanity's supply lines. Ryuji decided to stay behind and provide support, as his gun had a longer range than Yamato's. Yamato charged ahead, and Ryuji soon found himself surrounded by smaller enemies. After Yamato dealt with the gun-wielding enemies, he realized that Ryuji had been surrounded by enemies with self-destruct capabilities. Yamato activated the cannon to save Ryuji, but the enemy mothership dropped more enemies, and they needed to focus their fire on the mothership to win. However, they lacked the firepower to destroy it. The command center then sent Yamato a bazooka to use. Yamato flew up to grab the weapon and aimed it at the mothership. Just as some bugs ran over to interrupt, Ryuji used his abilities to clear the area around Yamato, allowing him to make the shot. Yamato successfully shot down the mothership, but at that moment, the debris and the bugs merged together again. Yamato asked the new AI if she had any suggestions to help him, and she proposed a new move, the meteor kick. However, Yamato couldn't just rush in to kick because the enemy had an outer armor layer. He charged forward but kicked down into the ground, then changed direction and kicked straight up from below the bug. Everyone was surprised by Yamato's ideas, and it seemed they would have to get used to his unconventional methods. A while later, Minami and Duke were puzzled as to why the enemy knew exactly where their critical positions were. It was clear there was a mole within their organization. Minami decided to relocate the city because the enemy was close to discovering its location. Meanwhile, Jun's green-haired friend met the boy with the curly hair. She advised him to speak with the teacher, but he didn't like that idea. A bookworm approached the curly-haired boy and offered to repair his robotic arm. Minami then introduced her plan to the entire military. She intended to relocate the city to a sacred place, which potentially housed a super-large battleship they could utilize. However, the ship had been divided into 12 pieces, with each piece located at a site the city could jump to in one relocation. She suspected that someone had planned this in advance to allow humanity to fight back. The only person capable of such a plan could be her ancestor, the blonde commander. Her family must have foreseen this and had the resources to build such a battleship. Minami decided to trust this theory and implement the plan. However, the challenge now was that to lift off, the city would need at least 1 year to balance, so for the time being, there was nothing they could do. That evening, the bookworm finished repairing the arm for the curly-haired boy. His father was a robot engineer, so the boy had some skills himself. The bookworm knew the curly-haired boy had intentionally allowed himself to be bullied to protect others from being targeted. He also knew the city was a fake. The commander then went to Jun. He had trouble explaining things, but because she met the requirements, he sought her out. He revealed that the city was fake, which piqued her interest, and she wanted to hear more. The two boys had started to figure out how to descend into the underground base. Jun was taken to the base, and the commander told her she would be selected to pilot a battle robot, which she immediately agreed to. Duke discovered the two boys were trying to get underground. He knew the bookworm often came here to spy on the robots, but soon realized that the bookworm had talent in the field of robotics, which piqued his interest. Suddenly, an alarm went off, signaling an attack, and the bookworm saw Yamato's group heading out. Yamato, who was feeling bored because he was about to go to sleep, had to head into battle instead. They noticed Ryuji was not present, but he had been captured by the assassin who killed the previous pilot. The assassin wanted to understand human evolution to adapt and survive on Earth. In the battle, it was clear that the enemy was tougher than usual. The command center decided to send Yamato a large sword, which was dropped from the sky for him to lead the charge. Yamato swept through the monsters, but they merged again, and this new monster seemed stronger than before. Yamato tried using the sword, but it wasn't enough to pierce the armor. He decided to charge up the sword's most powerful move, but during the charging process, he had to continuously dodge the monster's attacks. He charged it up to 100%, but it was still not enough, so he decided to keep charging it, even though there was a risk of the energy core exploding. Despite the warnings from the other two, Yamato kept charging the sword until it reached 200%, and the robot was overheating. Finally, he charged forward, slashing through the armor and splitting the monster in two. Teru was stunned by how far Yamato was willing to go. Jun, who witnessed the battle, became intrigued. Minami decided to scold Yamato because she didn't approve of his reckless fighting style. She went to see Duke, who suggested inviting the bookworm to join the team. Minami realized that the bookworm was the son of the person who had created the robot Yamato was using. Meanwhile, Yamato visited the daughter of the pilot who had been assassinated. Since both families were blended families, Yamato wanted to talk to her, but she mistook him for pitying her and walked away. On the way home, the assassin followed Yamato, but the princess stepped in to protect him. Yamato noticed and turned back to check. The assassin hated the royal family just like she did because they had exploited common soldiers like him. He then transformed into a form called Fang and completely overwhelmed the princess. Yamato had to return to save her, but the assassin remembered that he had business with Yamato as well and targeted him instead. The princess didn't want Yamato to die, so she transformed into a Fang herself to protect him. Her strength completely overpowered the assassin, and she eliminated him. The royal guard finally arrived to take care of the assassin's body. The princess reverted to her normal form, and Yamato still had no idea who she truly was. The next morning, Asuna regained control of her body and woke up in Yamato's house. Seeing her torn clothes, she assumed something had happened and screamed. She demanded to know what Yamato had seen, but he admitted that he hadn't really looked at anything. Regarding the events of the previous night, she revealed that someone had invaded her mind and controlled her. Yamato had no choice but to explain about the aliens. Asuna suspected that one of the aliens had taken control of her, so she decided to join Yamato in searching for the outsider hiding in the city. Meanwhile, Minami wanted the command center to conduct some experiments to speed up the city's takeoff. The curly-haired boy was standing by a bridge, lost in thought, when Jun's green-haired friend approached him. She advised him not to jump, even if life was tough, but he dismissed her concern, saying he wouldn't litter in the river. Suddenly, he noticed a drowning dog and jumped in to save it. The girl thought he was wasting his time since dogs could swim, but this one was injured and couldn't stay afloat. At that time, Yamato and Asuna continued searching for the two aliens who had controlled her. She vaguely remembered their location from when she was possessed, and had the feeling that they both wanted to kill Yamato yet hesitated, making it necessary to meet them in person. They arrived at a rundown hotel, with Kyoka secretly following them, mistakenly believing that Yamato and Asuna's relationship had already reached that stage. When they inquired, the receptionist refused to disclose guest information, making Asuna suspect that the two had already left. Since her senses had sharpened significantly after being controlled, she was certain they were gone. However, she had a lead. It involved their homeroom teacher. Yamato had something else to do, so they scheduled their investigation for the evening. Meanwhile, the bookworm had helped Duke improve the robots, leading Minami to officially invite him to work there. He was overjoyed at the opportunity. At the same time, the curly-haired boy was taken to a dojo by Jun's green-haired friend to learn self-defense. She attacked him relentlessly, but with his robotic memory, he quickly learned and countered her moves. They kept exchanging blows until she accidentally kicked him too hard, revealing that he was a robot. He explained that he had been created with the belief that he had to serve some purpose for humans. He had chosen to be bullied so that no one else would have to be. Despite being a robot, he never felt lonely and didn't need friends. Suddenly, 3 men arrived to take him away for dismantling, as he had fulfilled his purpose. He considered himself garbage, so if he could still be useful in some way, he was willing to accept it. The green-haired girl refused to let them take him, arguing that he had more humanity than most people. He was simply born as a robot. She fought off the 3 men in black and took him away. Minami, observing the situation, decided to help them both by making them pilots. Meanwhile, Jun was given access to past memories, and Yamato understood her emotions better than anyone else. Jun then requested to go into real combat, but the commander refused. However, Minami wanted her to learn faster, so she allowed Jun to experience real battle. For the first time, Jun piloted a robot. Though it was an outdated model, it was still functional. Suddenly, the 2 of them were surrounded by aliens. They were forced to fight, but Jun impulsively charged ahead and got knocked down. She was on the verge of being killed when the commander had to step in to save her. Through this, she finally understood the brutality of war. The commander was then shot and wounded by the enemy, so Jun had to drag him into cover. At that moment, Yamato's group and Ryuji arrived as reinforcements. They successfully wiped out the first wave of enemies, but immediately afterward, the mothership arrived and released a second wave. Yamato saw that even laser cannons wouldn't be enough to deal with this situation. However, the command center sent the 3rd battle robot to Jun and the commander. Both of them used the escape pod to evacuate and were caught by the robot, which pulled them inside. Jun noticed that the commander was injured, but he insisted that he was fine. They entered the cockpit, where one person would handle movement while the other focused on attacking. The robot was fully equipped with missile launchers, capable of locking onto all enemies on the battlefield. With just one missile barrage, the enemies were completely wiped out. That afternoon, Yamato and Asuna went to meet their teacher, while Minami personally recruited the green-haired girl and the curly-haired boy into the organization. Yamato and Asuna arranged a private meeting with their teacher, with Kyoka still tailing them. Yamato got straight to the point, and the teacher admitted it immediately, leading to a fight breaking out between them. At first, Yamato seemed to be losing because, as a human from Earth, he was physically weaker. However, he suddenly began displaying signs of an evolving ability similar to Ryuji's and started fighting back. The princess took control of Asuna's body again and pinned Yamato down. She wanted to negotiate with him, but Yamato called for his two friends to appear. Both of them came armed, but the princess still insisted on peaceful negotiations. She introduced herself as Arsham, explaining that it was the queen who desired war, whereas she opposed it, hoping to prevent this tragic future. Teru understood that she might have the power to stop the war, but even she wasn't certain she could only do everything within her ability. However, Yamato had no desire for peace with those who had brought suffering to humanity. Seeing that negotiations were failing, both sides had no choice but to withdraw. Yamato believed that Arsham was only talking about peace because she was cornered, and he had already resolved to annihilate them all. Meanwhile, Kyoka, who had been eavesdropping outside but couldn't hear anything, mistakenly assumed that Yamato and the teacher were fighting over Asuna. The next morning, Yamato didn't show up for class either. Jun and her green-haired friend, Momo, both knew the other was a pilot, so they deliberately found an excuse to argue with each other. Meanwhile, Yamato lay deep in thought about Arsham's words, but still found the idea of peace absurd. Kyoka sought him out, still pondering over the nature of his relationship with Asuna. At the same time, the royal guard believed that peace was impossible because humans were too stubborn. However, Arsham still held on to the hope of a peaceful future, which made him remark that she reminded him of her mother. Though their ideologies were different, their willpower and determination toward their goals were the same. Because of this, he vowed to follow the princess to the ends of the world. He could accept her stance, but the queen would not. Thus, Arsham decided to overthrow her mother. Meanwhile, one of the queen's retainers was sent to retrieve Arsham, but the queen instead ordered the destruction of the human city, regardless of Arsham being inside it, as punishment for her defiance. The royal retainer felt guilty, as he had been Arsham's mentor since childhood. His name was Grief, and in the past, Arsham had always scolded him for prioritizing the queen's orders over her own. Yet, despite that, both Grief and the royal guard remained her most loyal retainers, willing to sacrifice their lives for her. Another of the queen's retainers, knowing that Grief would hesitate, took on the responsibility himself. He deployed their strongest war machine, confident that humanity wouldn't stand a chance. Meanwhile, Hadato explained to Kyoka that he had been following Asuna only because she had told him she was being stalked. They had then trained together for self-defense. This absurd story somehow convinced Kyoka. That night, Arsham and her royal guard arrived at the diner run by the plump auntie, as Arsham felt an inexplicable urge to be there. Meanwhile, thanks to successfully recruiting the curly-haired boy into the command center, Minami was able to shorten the city's takeoff timeline from 1 year to less than a week. At the same time, the bookworm had developed 2 new robots. The swordsman model could be piloted by Yamato alone, but it required exceptional skill and placed immense pressure on him. The artillery model, on the other hand, was best suited for 2 pilots to balance firepower and mobility. Elsewhere, Jun and Momo sparred, and since Momo won, she demanded to pilot the artillery unit in the next battle. However, Jun refused, arguing that she had real combat experience. Suddenly, an attack alert was issued, prompting Duke to have both of them co-pilot the artillery unit. The commander needed to recover from his injuries, and besides, he lacked the aptitude to pilot an advanced unit like the artillery model. The bookworm wasn't sure if pairing this fire and water duo was a good idea, but Duke was confident they could handle it. The 2 girls boarded the robot and, as expected, exchanged a few snarky remarks before heading into battle. Yamato and Ryuji moved out first, but the 2 girls charged ahead on their own. They activated the robot's special ability, which allowed them to control the left and right thrusters independently, enabling maneuvers impossible for a single pilot robot. The 2 then summoned the pillars, which linked together to form a cage. They pushed the surrounding enemies toward it, and as the cage rebounded them back, the girls spun their swords and slashed the enemies mid-air. Seeing this, the others couldn't afford to lag behind and also gave it their all. Suddenly, the enemy forces retreated, and the Queen's secret weapon was deployed. It was significantly larger than any previous foe. The two girls called for missile launchers and fired everything they had, but it remained unscathed. Yamato followed up with a laser cannon, yet it had no effect either. The command center was at a loss on how to counter it. Minami suddenly experienced another episode of illness and a splitting headache. The commander urged her to rest, but she insisted she could endure. Meanwhile, the three robots outside desperately tried to fight back, but their efforts were nearly futile. The monster fired an energy beam at Yamato's group, and everyone knew that a direct hit would be fatal. While dodging its attacks, it locked onto Ryuji, forcing the two girls to block the shot with their shields. When they then charged at it, the creature swatted them away with its tail. It stomped down, generating a magnetic field to trap them inside. Then, its tail morphed into a blade, combining with the laser from its mouth for a devastating attack. The swordsman robot barely dodged the laser, grazing it slightly. At that moment, Ryugo suddenly recalled some memories of his mother. Meanwhile, Arsham managed to contact Yamato. She had a way to help him defeat the creature. Yamato was skeptical, but Arsham chose to believe in him, saying she had come to understand him somewhat. Besides, since he had saved her before, whether or not he trusted her was up to him. Yamato was willing to listen, and she explained that the creature was unmanned, controlled by 3 electronic cores. If even one remained intact, it could regenerate the other 2. He relayed this information to the team, informing them that they had to attack all 3 cores simultaneously. However, this was nearly impossible. They had to strike at the exact same second, not a fraction too soon or too late, and countless factors could throw off their timing. The young man with the curly hair, Kauda, claimed that he could set up precise navigation for all 3 robots. Minami decided to trust him. Sensing danger, the creature went berserk, attacking even more ferociously. Kauda sent them a song to time their attack. On the first beat, the team attempted to attack, but the creature disrupted their strike, forcing them to abort. They recalibrated, waited for the next beat, and successfully impaled all 3 cores simultaneously. The creature ceased functioning, but the enemy's ship fired a retrieval beam to reclaim it. For now, they had won this battle. Afterward, Yamato admitted that he had won only because he received guidance from the enemy. Following the battle, Yamato sought out Asuna, asking for her help in meeting Arsham to confirm something. However, Asuna felt he was treating her like a tool and slapped him before storming off. That night, 2 new robots were completed. The bookworm had discovered an advanced rapid assembly technology, allowing them to be operational as soon as the next day. Minami announced that the 2 new robots, along with the swordsman model, would be modified for single-pilot operation. Yamato was excited at the prospect of piloting his own unit. The bookworm then asked Minami how she had known the previous creature had metal resistant to their attacks. She replied that it was just intuition and a lucky guess that happened to be correct. Meanwhile, Teru and Yamato noticed that Ryugo was acting strangely. Ryugo had recalled past memories and realized that his current mother was not his biological mother. He wanted to bid her farewell, but when he entered, he saw that she had already prepared a meal for him. He was afraid if he told her the truth, would she see him differently? Would she still treat him the same way? But he couldn't keep pretending forever. So he decided to speak. He returned his father's keepsake to her and admitted that he was not her biological son, but he was still grateful to have had someone like her to care for him. As he turned to leave, his mother revealed that she had known all along. But she had already found all the happiness she needed. She simply wanted to continue being his mother. After all, who else would put up with a troublemaker like him? The 2 embraced, and the scene was truly touching. Yamato and Teru, watching from the sidelines, also gained a new perspective on family. When Teru returned home, he noticed that his parents were gradually losing the effects of their memory suppression. Their old memories of their previous family were starting to resurface. Teru had to speak up to snap them out of it. Meanwhile, the queen was furious that Arsham had interfered and helped humanity secure victory. She decided to send Grief into battle to deal with Arsham. However, he hesitated, since when had their race become so barbaric as to sacrifice their own daughters just to destroy their enemies? But the queen insisted that this was her way of educating her children, leaving Grief with no choice but to turn away. She then ordered her remaining royal guard to mobilize the entire army, having merely tested Grief's resolve. At that moment, Arsham was lost in thought when Asuna suddenly appeared before her. Asuna allowed Arsham to borrow her body, enabling her to meet Yamato in person. Arsham confessed that, initially, she had only pretended to like him as an excuse, but over time, that lie became the truth. She had genuinely started to care about him and wanted to listen to him more. She wished for a world where both species could coexist. Meanwhile, Minami had overworked herself, becoming so strict that the command room staff advised her to take a break. Exhausted, she later encountered Teru, and the two returned to their shared quarters. It was revealed that Minami was actually an alien, and only Teru knew this. Years ago, when humanity was under attack by aliens, Minami had saved Teru. When he regained consciousness, she admitted that her own kind had killed his parents and asked if he wanted revenge. She tossed him a knife, telling him that if he didn't want to live, he could take her life or even take her with him in his revenge. However, Teru lacked the resolve to go through with it. Seeing this, Minami admitted that she was the same as him. She detested killing and believed the queen's ideology was wrong. She loved the beauty of Earth and had, 9 years ago, secretly sent a warning to humanity to help them prepare. And if humans were not entirely incompetent, she would now lead them toward a world where both species could live together. Returning to the present, the medicine that allowed her to adapt to Earth was gradually losing its effect, so she wanted to accelerate their plans before it was too late. Meanwhile, Yamato was guided to meet Arsham in person. He realized that she wasn't so different from humans. She recounted how her home planet had been destroyed, leaving her people in desperation and exhaustion. When they discovered Earth, the queen chose to conquer it swiftly to secure a new home. Even though she knew it was wrong, could he truly blame her? Would he protect his family or a group of strangers? Yamato understood her perspective. At that moment, Arsham suddenly felt hungry, so he took her out to eat. Since she couldn't eat meat, he took her to have noodles. The two were able to enjoy a pleasant conversation. A passerby, upon seeing Arsham, was momentarily shocked. As they left, Yamato admitted that she wasn't so bad after all. She expressed a desire to learn more about this world, so he took her to watch a movie. She realized that humans could revive others through the power of love. He then took her to play baseball, go shopping, try crane games, and have drinks. Suddenly, 2 men in black appeared to capture her. Yamato fought them off and escaped with her. At the same time, Grief met with the royal guard, and the two entered a maid cafe to talk. Grief was bewildered to see the royal guard so utterly enthralled by the cuteness of the place. Getting back to the main issue, Grief had come to rescue the princess, as the queen had ordered the complete annihilation of both the place and Arsham for her betrayal. Both of them understood the queen's nature, but the royal guard refused to hand Arsham over. He had already resolved to help her seize the throne. Meanwhile, Yamato and Arsham successfully evaded capture, and she finally admitted that she was a princess and that she desired peace. Suddenly, an attack warning blared. This time, the enemy forces were 10 times larger than usual. Everyone prepared for battle, but Yamato was nowhere to be found. Ryugo and Teru were concerned, as they had relied too much on Yamato in the past. However, they resolved to fight on their own this time. Their objective wasn't to defeat all the enemies, but to buy time. This time, the enemy was determined to crush them completely, so they only needed to hold out until the city could take flight. Grief also joined the battle, declaring that if the enemy commander advanced any further, he would consider him an enemy as well. At this moment, Yamato had taken Arsham to his swordsman robot. However, One of the soldiers there recognized Arsham as someone from the engineering division and immediately pointed a gun at her. Both Duke and Yamato tried to stop the young man, but Arsham was willing to face the crimes of her people. If he wanted to shoot, he could go ahead. If she could become their ally, she would accept it. Yamato was finally able to reach his robot with Arsham, letting her sit in the co-pilot seat. His aunt called to inform him that everyone else had already gone ahead, and that this was a battle they could not win. Buying time was the only objective. Yamato was equipped with flight gear, but since it wasn't fully completed, he could only fly for a short time before overheating. Meanwhile, Duke also managed to bring Kyoka to the scene, as she had already been dragged too deep into the situation. She was given a role in the command room and decided to fight alongside Yamato. At the same time, Teru and Ryugo were getting used to their new robots. They were confident that if the monster from last time returned, they could take it down. The moment they finished speaking, it actually appeared. The two coordinated their attacks, pulling it down with cables. Teru pointed out its new weak spot, this time on its back. Ryugo slammed it down, causing all the machinery in that area to melt and explode. Elsewhere, the commander observed that the enemy forces were linking together, with one specific unit acting as the central hub. After careful analysis, he identified the key target and ordered all troops to fire at it. Ryuji charged straight into the battlefield to cut down as many enemies as possible. Yamato targeted the enemy aircraft, with Arsham guiding him to aim at their wing-mounted navigational systems to disable them. He initially wanted to shoot the engines to finish them off quickly, but Arsham insisted on minimizing casualties among her people. After all, their true enemy was the Queen. Yamato relented and followed her advice, slashing the aircraft's wings to gradually force them into a controlled descent instead of outright destruction. Back in the command room, an elderly mayor entered and suddenly pulled out a gun, revealing himself as the traitor. He had a terminal illness and had secretly collaborated with the aliens in exchange for life-prolonging medicine. Minami lunged forward to seize his gun, but her compatibility with Earth's environment failed at that moment, causing her to take a bullet. Duke fired back, but the mayor had a bulletproof shield. Kauder rushed forward to grab the gun but was shot in the head, yet he suffered no harm. She was quickly rushed to medical care. Now, the city had to take off as soon as possible. They couldn't let Minami's efforts go to waste. Meanwhile, Grief arrived to reclaim the princess. He admitted that he had disobeyed orders, making Arsham realize that her mother had abandoned her. She chose to stand with the humans and fight. Without hesitation, Yamato engaged Grief in battle. Grief quickly knocked Yamato's greatsword out of his hands, forcing him to switch to dual blades. He then created a force field, trapping Yamato inside. The royal guard called in and officially entrusted the princess to Yamato. Determined not to let Arsham go, Yamato activated his evolution ability similar to Ryuji's and fought even harder. He managed to push Grief out of the force field, but both of them were now plummeting toward the city. Meanwhile, Minami was brought to the medical facility. When the doctor examined her, they discovered she was an alien. At that moment, the true leader emerged. She was still a teenager and thus not officially recognized as captain, but she possessed all the necessary qualifications and was, in reality, the rightful commander. She immediately took control of the operation, giving orders to accelerate the city's takeoff. The Queen, realizing the situation, ordered the enemy commander to launch a missile to end everything. A massive missile was fired. Meanwhile, Yamato and Grief crashed into the city, causing significant damage. Minami's true identity was now exposed, so she requested some time alone from the doctor and everyone else. She called Teru, apologizing for being unable to fulfill their shared dream. Realizing something was wrong, Teru frantically called out to her. However, Minami knew she likely wouldn't survive. Finally, the city successfully detached from the ground. Arsham regained consciousness but saw that Yamato had stopped breathing. Desperate, she began performing CPR. When chest compressions failed, she resorted to mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. On the battlefield, everyone received news of Minami's fate, but Teru was the one suffering the most. Minami left a message for Teru, asking him to continue pursuing the dream they had both yet to fulfill. She believed that if a person had the power to take many lives, they also had the power to do the opposite to save many lives. When the message ended, it marked the birth of a sad boy. Teru decided to throw himself into the brutal battlefield and keep fighting in Minami's place. Meanwhile, 2 female pilots had run out of ammunition, and their robots were barely holding together. The captain ordered them to escape using the emergency pods, but only Momo managed to get away. Jun chose to stay behind, determined to protect the commander at all costs. She took multiple gunshots until her robot was completely engulfed in flames. Ryuji and the commander rushed in to help her. The commander even made it to her cockpit, but Jun had already suffered fatal wounds. She could only leave behind her last words before passing away. Ryuji could no longer remain calm. He decided to use his full power for revenge, refusing to forgive those who had taken Jun's life. He charged straight into the enemy ranks once more. Meanwhile, Teru was equipped with thrusters to fight in the air. Ryugo was panicking, unable to see any allies. The bookworm instructed him to use a thin section of ground ahead as a trap. When the bookworm removed his glasses, he actually looked quite handsome. At this moment, Yamato regained consciousness and headed outside with Arsham, only to be attacked by Grief. The latter relentlessly pursued Yamato. Yamato tried to defend himself with a metal rod, but it was snapped in half in a single strike. Somehow, Asuna had survived despite the devastation around her. She retrieved the weapon Arsham had previously given her and threw it to Yamato. He fought back, but Grief remained fixated solely on Arsham. She ran to the rooftop, where the royal guard was waiting. He tried to stop Grief, but Grief lunged forward and stabbed him without hesitation. Previously, both Grief and the royal guard had admitted to each other that they deeply admired and perhaps even loved Arsham. However, the royal guard had chosen to discard his feelings in order to stay by her side, watching over her as she grew up. Now, seeing her with another man, he couldn't help but feel heartbroken. With his last breath, he passed away. Grief was momentarily stunned, allowing Yamato to slash him in the eye. Wounded, Grief retreated to his robot and took Arsham with him. Yamato also ran back to his own robot, struggling to activate it, then used all his thruster power to give chase. Outside, Arsham tried to reason with Grief, but Yamato caught up and severed the arm holding her. Both of them drifted in zero gravity, desperately clinging to whatever they could. Grief moved ahead, but Teru grabbed Yamato, preventing him from pursuing further. Yamato pulled out a gun, threatening Teru, but Teru simply told him to go ahead and shoot. Minami was already dead, so he no longer cared. Unable to do anything, Yamato had no choice but to retreat. Their priority now was to destroy the massive missile that threatened the city. The Supreme Commanders switched the ship into combat mode, unveiling a barrage of cannons, including a massive main cannon. She ordered energy to be evenly distributed enough to fire their weapons while keeping the ship airborne. Once the enemy fleet was within range, their weapons began charging. The attack wiped out the enemy fleet, their command ship, and all forces on the ground. However, as the smoke cleared, the missile was still intact. Yamato was given the final mission. All available energy was transferred to him, allowing him to wield the great sacred sword. The sword materialized from nothing, and Yamato lifted it, charging forward. With a single, powerful strike, he cleaved the missile in two. The operation was a complete success, but at a heavy cost. Meanwhile, Arsham remained safe on the ground. She encountered an old man who was willing to give her a ride. After returning, Yamato was haunted by recurring dreams of Arsham. His 2 friends noticed that he wasn't himself and invited him out, but he declined. Asuna understood what was happening. Yamato truly cared about Arsham. Elsewhere, Jun had miraculously survived and was grateful to Ryuji for saving her. It turned out that when the commander retrieved her, Ryuji had used his power to bring her back to life. If he could do that, then why not save Minami too? The Supreme Commander then revealed Minami's final wishes to the rest of the crew. To keep her secret hidden from the public, they used memory alteration techniques. She was later summoned to discuss their next mission. Meanwhile, the scientists were examining Minami's body. They couldn't understand why humans and aliens were nearly identical aside from the differences in their blood composition. After re-examining the body, the scientist was shocked by a discovery. Meanwhile, the bookworm and Duke successfully rebuilt the robots for the two female pilots. Ryugo, however, was clueless about what was wrong with Yamato. Teru explained that Yamato had fallen in love with an alien just as Teru himself had once done. Suddenly, an enemy alert was issued. Teru told Ryugo not to take part in this battle. At the same time, Grief, who had been imprisoned, managed to escape. The Queen ordered his execution, but he went to her himself, challenging her to take his head personally if she truly wished to kill him. Meanwhile, Arsham encountered Victor, the leader of a self-sustaining underground gang. He had previously spoken with aliens and understood that they were merely trying to survive, just like humans, so he bore them no hatred. Suddenly, a mutated Earth creature emerged from underground. Victor immediately ordered his men to prepare a robot for him. As soon as it transformed, Arsham was astonished. It looked almost identical to Yamato's robot. At the same time, since the battle was taking place in the air, only Yamato and Teru's robots could participate. However, Teru had yet to arrive, so Ryuji decided to pilot in his place. With a large number of enemies approaching, Ryuji formulated a plan. Yamato understood it immediately without needing an explanation and proceeded accordingly. Ryuji fired a barrage of missiles, creating a magnetic field that immobilized the enemies, while Yamato charged straight through them, crushing everything in his path. After clearing the smaller foes, the remaining enemies combined into a larger form. Yamato responded with his cannons. To prevent Yamato from being pushed backward by the recoil, Ryuji braced against his back and fired an attack in the opposite direction. The opposing forces cancelled each other out, neutralizing both their movement and the combined enemy. Now, only the massive enemy warship remained. Yamato wanted to use the great sacred sword again, but they didn't have enough materials left to recreate it. Instead, he decided to use the remaining resources to craft something else. While Yamato was gathering energy, Victor down below knocked out the mutant creature with a punch, then charged forward and obliterated its head. By this point, Yamato had taken all the remaining material from their ship and ascended into space. There, he gathered additional energy and created a jetpack-like aircraft on his back. Additionally, he formed a massive meteor. Using the wings on his new flight unit, he propelled the meteor downward, hurling it directly at the enemy warship. Everyone was stunned not only by Yamato's extraordinary abilities, but also by his creativity in using his intellect to fight. Meanwhile, Arsham asked Victor about the origins of his machine. He simply replied that he had stolen its design from an organization and used an abandoned factory to build it. In this world, such machines were essential for survival. Back at the palace, the Queen prepared to execute Grief. However, he had his men ambush her, severing both her arms. With this, he declared a coup and seized the throne elsewhere. The scientist made a shocking discovery: Minami was pregnant. Her child was a hybrid between a human and an alien. Even more astonishing was the fact that the baby was alive. Teru was completely shaken by the news, uncertain of how to face it. Grief had now successfully usurped the Queen's position and declared himself the new ruler. He confronted the former Queen, telling her that he wouldn't kill her just yet. He first needed to subjugate those who opposed him. She warned him that he wouldn't be able to control their race without her, as she was the only one capable of producing soldiers. But Grief argued that her daughter could do the same. Meanwhile, Arsham struck a deal with Victor, asking him to take her somewhere. He demanded payment, so she reminded him about the battleship that had just departed. She wanted him to take her there so she could save everyone on board. In return, she would give him all the supplies aboard the ship. Victor found the deal interesting and agreed. However, before helping her, he needed to return to his settlement to refuel. At this moment, the president and his fleet were en route to the crashed warship, aiming to rescue any survivors and salvage its resources and cargo. Their spaceship soon landed and activated its camouflage mode. The captain then led a reconnaissance squad to explore the surrounding area. Meanwhile, Yamato reunited with Ryugo and noticed that he was injured. Ryugo explained that he had accidentally wandered into Q's territory. Yamato had no idea who Q's was, so the bookworm informed him Q's was a mysterious figure who ruled over the school itself. Yamato wanted to find this person, but Ryugo didn't want him to bring trouble upon himself. However, Yamato reasoned that there had to be a reason why he was the only one unaware of Q's existence. Ignoring Ryugo's warnings, he decided to seek out this Q's and provoke him. Meanwhile, Momo reunited with Jun. Jun had been considering cutting her hair short, like her friends. Suddenly, Momo was struck by a memory from the past, one involving her father. At the same time, Arsham had been taken to Victor's town, Solon, where 2,000 people lived. She was puzzled as to how they managed to survive there. Victor explained that, whether they liked it or not, they had no choice but to find a way to live. Arsham asked if Victor harbored resentment toward her, as it was her kind who had driven him and these people into such dire circumstances. However, Victor replied that hatred was pointless. His only goal was to protect these people and help them survive. Suddenly, a group of thugs arrived, causing trouble for Victor and trying to flirt with Arsham. Victor quickly dealt with them, but the gang leader pulled out a knife. Even so, Victor effortlessly overpowered him. Meanwhile, the scientist approached Teru. He had discovered that Minami's unborn child was his. The baby was a hybrid between an alien and a human from Earth. The scientists believed that this child might be able to survive in environments where humans couldn't. He wanted to experiment on the baby to help humanity develop a way to live in alien conditions. However, Teru was terrified. If word got out about the child, the aliens would surely try to seize it for the same purpose. He feared that the child would become a major threat. But to the scientist, the baby represented hope for humanity. He decided to conduct his research in secret so that no one else would find out. Meanwhile, Yamato reunited with Jun and Ryuji. The three of them realized that none of them knew anything about Q's, so they decided to investigate. They entered the gymnasium, where Q's was already waiting for them. Q's was confused as to why the three of them didn't remember him. They suspected that Q's had altered everyone's memories. However, whether it was everyone's memories that had been changed, or only their own, was impossible to determine within the confines of the shelter. Q's himself wanted to become a pilot, and the fastest way to do that was to defeat a pilot in front of the cameras. Q's suddenly grabbed Yamato's head and kicked him away. Yamato told the other two not to interfere, he would handle this himself. He charged at Q's, unleashing a series of attacks, but Q's dodged them effortlessly and countered with a kick. Q's mocked Yamato, saying he was no match for him. Yamato couldn't understand how Q's was able to evade his attacks so perfectly. It felt like he was fighting someone from a special forces unit. But then, by chance, Yamato accidentally turned on a screen and saw Asuna's performance. With music playing, Yamato suddenly fought with much greater enthusiasm, but even then, he was still being pushed back. Realizing he needed an advantage, he signaled Jun and Ryuji to open the curtains at his command. Yamato cared more about winning than his pride. He then leaped forward, dodging Q's attacks while grabbing onto a rope and swinging toward the projector above. Jun and Ryuji followed his signal, pulling open the curtains and flooding the gymnasium with bright sunlight, momentarily blinding Q's. Seizing the opportunity, Yamato rushed forward and landed two powerful kicks to Q's head. Meanwhile, the captain's patrol team had encountered enemies on the surface. Yamato's team was quickly called into battle. He told Q's to be ready to explain everything when they returned. Yamato swiftly boarded his robot, which was now pre-equipped with upgraded guns and swords. All of the pilot's robots had received enhancements. As they deployed to support the captain's team, everyone was excited about their upgrades. However, they were suddenly attacked by a new enemy that flew past and spewed flames at them. The foe continuously darted out of sight, making it difficult to track. Yamato suggested splitting up to hunt the enemy down. The others were surprised, since when was Yamato their leader? He simply stated that no one else was more suited to giving orders than him. Meanwhile, Grief had captured his former superior, Vals, to punish him for treason. In the past, Vals had defied a direct order from the Queen, resulting in his long imprisonment. However, unlike the Queen, Vals was no coward. Vals realized that Grief was holding something over him, so he chose to submit and follow Grief's orders. At the same time, one of the Queen's most loyal subordinates, Dimir, secretly freed her and helped her escape. Elsewhere, the ancestors of humanity, Adam and Eve, discovered that Earth, the planet they had nurtured, had been invaded. Determined to put a stop to this, they decided to take action. Back with Yamato's group, the fire-wielding enemy returned. The team nicknamed him the Fire Demon. He began launching energy projectiles that could track their movements. Even though they tried to split up and escape, the projectiles relentlessly pursued them. Teru noticed that the projectiles were tracking their motion and told everyone to stop moving. As expected, the projectiles ceased their pursuit. The Fire Demon realized that the pilots had figured out his trick, but their stillness gave him the perfect chance to finish them off himself. More enemies began to swarm in, putting Yamato's team in a difficult situation. However, unexpectedly, the tracking projectiles changed course and began targeting the moving enemies as well. This led Yamato to conclude that the projectiles weren't advanced enough to differentiate between friend and foe. While this temporarily solved their problem, the Fire Demon himself was still a threat. Yamato decided to use the robot's signature, Destruction Punch. Teru doubted its effectiveness, as it would be useless if it didn't hit. But Yamato was confident he had a plan. He instructed Ryugo to attach an electric motor to his right arm and to the Fire Demon's leg. Ryugo followed the plan while Teru worked to prevent the Fire Demon from dodging. With Teru's interference, Ryugo successfully attached the motor to the Fire Demon's leg. Yamato then fired his robotic arm and signaled Ryugo to activate the electric current. The robot's arm connected to the Fire Demon and began chasing him down. Yamato increased the speed of the attack, making it impossible for the Fire Demon to dodge. He suffered severe damage. However, before Yamato could finish him off, Vals ordered the Fire Demon's pilot to retreat, as they had already gathered enough combat data. Meanwhile, Grief received news that the Queen had escaped. He correctly predicted that she would seek out Arsham, but decided to let her roam free for now. Elsewhere, Victor was preparing to transport supplies. Arsham wanted to accompany him. Their first stop was a small house where a grandmother and her grandson lived. Victor administered a medicine to the grandmother to prolong her life, a little longer medicine he had extracted from a parasite that had previously attacked them. However, after stepping outside, he quietly told the grandson to stay by his grandmother's side until morning, as that was all the time she had left. Though he regretted it, there was nothing more he could do for her. After completing the delivery, Arsham was moved by the sight of people struggling to survive. She wondered if she had ever been as strong as them and decided to help Victor with his transport duties. She spent the entire day working with Victor and soon became beloved by the townspeople. Victor promised them that he would put an end to this situation. That night, Arsham began to fully realize the extent of the crimes her people had committed. Victor arranged a place for her to sleep, and she asked what he meant when he said he would save everyone. He didn't answer, he simply walked away. Through Victor's dreams, it was revealed that he was actually Momo's father. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, radar detected 3 incoming enemies. Victor quickly mobilized for battle, activating his robot and flying out of the shelter to confront them. Meanwhile, Hughes had been captured and taken to the base, where he met the president. She revealed that she knew Hughes had hacked into the memory system of the citizens and fabricated a false identity for himself. In reality, he was an illegal immigrant. She refused to tolerate illegal immigrants and decided to deport him. However, Hughes argued that the president could make use of him, as he possessed all the necessary qualifications to become an outstanding pilot. Back with Victor, he was struggling against the enemy forces, as they were far too fast. Before long, reinforcements arrived for them. Victor ordered his subordinates to deliver his sword. As soon as he had it, he used his technique to create a whirlwind by running in circles, obscuring the enemy's vision. Then he soared high into the sky before plunging down with a devastating punch, annihilating a vast area just as Yamato had done before. Back with Yamato's group, Hughes passed the piloting simulation test with a score far surpassing all previous pilots. However, the president required him to undergo a psychological assessment as well. Suddenly, an alert signaled the appearance of enemy forces, prompting the deployment of all pilots. Their adversary this time was a new type of enemy, one that appeared to be particularly powerful, so the main pilots were dispatched. However, unexpectedly, none of the robots could launch. Someone had hacked into the system, preventing them from deploying. But Yamato's robot was somehow able to move and was sent into battle, even though he was still in the command room. At that moment, Hughes spoke up. He was the one who had hacked the system and forged an ID to take control of Yamato's robot. He wanted to prove himself in real combat rather than going through tedious tests. As soon as he entered battle, Hughes charged at the enemy and executed maneuvers that only a highly trained pilot could perform. In an instant, he eliminated 3 enemies. Then, he drew his sword and swiftly wiped out the remaining foes. Yamato found nothing impressive about this victory, but everyone else was astonished by how efficiently Hughes handled the enemies, consuming remarkably little fuel in the process. The bookworm among them couldn't believe this was Hughes' first time piloting a robot. Hughes displayed an exceptional understanding of Yamato's robot and requested to speak with the engineers after identifying some issues with it. However, the bookworm was convinced that the problem wasn't with the robot, but rather that Hughes' processing speed was simply too fast for the machine to keep up with. Meanwhile, Momo began recalling past memories when she caught John, and she suddenly fainted. Duke took her to restore her memories, and she learned that her father was struggling to survive in the harsh outside world. She expressed her desire to rescue him. However, Duke explained that many within the organization opposed this idea, as they lacked sufficient information about the people outside. It wasn't a matter of simply deciding to help. At the same time, Teru met with the doctor and learned that in just 1 month, the child would be ready for experimentation. Teru pleaded with the doctor to abandon the child because its existence would ignite war. The doctor claimed that the child was his, but Teru didn't want the life he and Minami had created to become the catalyst for conflict. In the following days, Yamato noticed Hughes becoming increasingly arrogant after officially being recognized as a pilot. However, despite his personal dislike for Hughes' attitude, he couldn't deny the talent that was being acknowledged. Then, unexpectedly, Hughes stormed into the command room with a gun and declared that from now on, he would be in charge. No one understood what Hughes was trying to do, until he made it clear he was taking over the ship. But Hughes had planned everything before making his move. He revealed that he had planted explosives in the ship's air filtration system, and with just the press of a button, he could release toxic air from the outside, infecting everyone on board. In reality, Hughes was working under Victor's command. Victor had orchestrated a plan for Hughes to infiltrate the ship as a pilot and seize control of the command room. However, their goal wasn't terrorism, it was to save the people. Hughes demanded that the ship be sent to pick up the people from Victor's shelter. With no other options, the president was forced to compromise and ordered the ship to change course. Victor had previously taught Hughes how to overwrite the memories of the citizens, allowing him to infiltrate the city. This was possible because Victor had once been one of the architects of the shelter. Meanwhile, Teru learned about the situation in the command room and reported it to Ryuichi. The two decided to use a ventilation shaft to bypass the security cameras and sneak into the command center. Given how Q's had managed to take over the command room undetected, they concluded that he must have had inside help. At the same time, Teru and Ryuji disguised themselves as ship personnel to infiltrate the command room. Elsewhere, the Bookworm and Duke were puzzled as to why the command room had not responded to them. They had just completed a new robot and needed to introduce it to the command team. Back in the command room, Teru silently moved behind Q's. One of Q's allies noticed and attempted to warn him, but she was quickly subdued by Ryugo and Yamato. Teru tried to stand up and confront Q's, but was caught by him. However, Q's made a mistake and left an opening, allowing Ryuji to use an electric gun to restrain him. Victor, at this point, realized that the plan had failed, and Arsham now understood Victor's strategy. She believed she could help him with this. The president, reconsidering, decided that they would still go to rescue over 2,000 civilians from outside and bring them into the shelter. If there wasn't enough space for them, she could temporarily remove some goods from storage and bring them back later. She then ordered Q's and his team to be released, with one condition: those 2,000 civilians brought aboard the ship would have their memories altered. Suddenly, another enemy alert came in, and Q's was given permission to go into battle. He then met with the Bookworm, who informed him that he had created a new robot specifically for Q's high-speed combat style. Meanwhile, Momo advised Jun to give up on being a pilot, as Jun was suffering from psychological trauma. When it came time for the battle, Q's and Yamato exchanged a few sarcastic remarks. Yamato also wondered why Q's seemed to be listening to the president more than before, to which Q's replied that he needed to repay her for taking in his people. Q's then charged ahead and swiftly took down many enemies, prompting the president to warn him not to venture too far from the others. However, Q's was surrounded by enemies and had to be assisted by Yamato, who also took the opportunity to tease him a little. Yamato charged forward as well, and Q's, not wanting to be left behind, followed suit. Because Q's was moving so quickly, Yamato had to use his thrusters at just the right level to keep up with him. Ryuji and Teru, observing Yamato, were continually surprised by his action. Yamato then transformed into a spinning, deadly machine, cutting down every enemy in his path. The president noticed that Yamato and Q's were working exceptionally well together. However, their main enemy appeared a massive, tank-like machine. Q's charged ahead, forcing Yamato to follow closely behind. Q's knew he had to break through a weak spot in the tank, so he activated his armor-piercing technique. He sped forward, gathering kinetic energy, and instructed Yamato to use the same technique at the spot he was targeting. Both of them successfully coordinated their attack and pierced through the tank, completely destroying it. Meanwhile, the Queen had arrived at the human city. Grief discovered that Arsham was hiding in a village outside the shelter. That night, Teru snuck into the doctor's room to eliminate his own child, but the doctor mistakenly thought Teru was still interested in his child and came to visit. The doctor explained that, according to theory, a child between two different species shouldn't be possible. However, since the child's DNA matched both Teru's and Minami's, the existence of this child was undoubtedly a miracle. Arsham, upon seeing the ship approach the village, went inside to inform Victor. She still felt guilty, as her people had committed such atrocities. Victor asked her if she wanted to join his group on the ship, but she suddenly remembered Yamato and left. The president then instructed Q's to guide everyone aboard the ship. She ordered the entire ship to prepare everything needed to bring the civilians aboard. Soon after, the ship landed, and Yamato, along with Q's and a small team, entered the village. Q's remarked that people living comfortably in the shelter like Yamato wouldn't understand the struggles of the people here. Victor then arrived and explained to the group that the way the villagers had survived up until now was by gathering resources from nature and being self-sufficient. Meanwhile, Arsham walked nearby, unaware that Yamato had also arrived. She was on her way to care for two elderly people in a basement. The grandmother harbored a deep hatred for the aliens, blaming them for the state her granddaughter was in. Hearing this, Arsham felt even more sorrowful. She went outside and saw a hedgehog-shaped keychain, which reminded her of Yamato. She wondered if Yamato had made it here. Later, Victor encountered the Queen and her attendant Demir. He approached and struck up a conversation, stating that he had no ill will toward all aliens, as he understood that the Queen was also trying to help her people survive, even if it meant harming others. At this time, John and Momo had also followed the captain down to the village, and Arsham was finally reunited with the Queen. The Queen acknowledged that Arsham must be angry at her for attempting to eliminate her, but she was willing to atone for her actions. She wanted Arsham to help reclaim the throne from Grief, and once she succeeded, she would allow Arsham to take the throne. The reason she needed Arsham's help was that Grief still had feelings for her, which could make him lower his guard, allowing her to seize the throne. However, Arsham had a different goal. She wanted to change both her people and Grief, as she hoped for her race to atone for their sins and repair the earth. The Queen recognized Arsham's capabilities and advised her to gather the defeated soldiers who could not return to the ship. However, she had to show them that she was saving them because she needed them, not out of pity. Only then would they fight for her, and she would have an army of her own. Meanwhile, a team sent by Grief was closing in on the village to capture Arsham and bring her back. Hughes was discovered by Victor's group, who suspected that he might have a crush on the president due to her kindness. Victor then sought help from the pilot group to move a robot onto the ship. Yamato noticed that Victor's robot was very similar to the one he used, but Victor had improved it to be even better. Momo, looking at Victor, thought he resembled her father from years ago, but she wasn't certain, so she didn't say anything. Just then, Yamato detected an enemy attack, and Victor decided to head into battle to stop them. Two special enemies were also detected, and the president informed Yamato's group that she would transport robots to the village storage area for them. 4 robots were sent for Yamato and Q's team, as Ryuji and Momo's robots were still being upgraded, leaving only 4 of them to fight. Victor also piloted a robot out of storage and instructed the team to follow his lead, as he was more familiar with the terrain than they were. Arsham, upon noticing the robots heading into battle, immediately realized that Yamato was nearby. Meanwhile, the 2 enemies sent by Grief detected both the princess's and the Queen's energy signatures inside the village, but held back from attacking right away. Yamato then jumped onto Victor's robot and charged straight into the enemy ranks, cutting down a large number of foes. Victor and Q's then coordinated an attack, eliminating an entire enemy squad with a single move. At this time, the bookworm informed Ryugo that his robot had been adjusted for long-range combat. Excited, Ryugo immediately switched to combat mode, transforming into an anti-aircraft machine equipped with an array of weapons. However, Teru suggested they coordinate their attacks. Ryugo reverted to his standard form and threw Teru into the air. Teru then deployed an electric net to surround an area, while Ryugo unleashed a powerful energy blast, forcing the enemies into Teru's electric net, wiping them out. Now, only the 2 main enemies remained. They launched a coordinated assault on Yamato, forcing Victor to step in and help. The president then reported that new equipment was being sent to Yamato. Upon receiving it, he discovered it was a flying board. Victor instructed Yamato to follow a specific trajectory while he handled the rest. Yamato followed Victor's guidance, and at the key point along his flight path, Victor unleashed an attack but accelerated Yamato's speed. Yamato then swiftly executed an X-shaped slash, severely damaging the enemy and forcing them to retreat. Victor decided that the team shouldn't pursue them, as their priority was evacuating the civilians. The president observed that their combat capabilities had increased significantly, but she suspected that the enemy would soon deploy their full force, so they needed to prepare thoroughly. Meanwhile, on the ship, a civilian had been possessed by an alien. The possessed individual approached the queen, requesting medication to stabilize his body while possessed. The queen demanded that he swear loyalty to her before she would save him. The reason she took him in was because she needed him for future purposes. The two recently defeated subordinates returned to report to Grief that the princess was in the village and that a squad was stationed nearby, waiting for the right moment to capture her. However, Grief ordered the two to burn down the entire village because if the village could no longer serve as a shelter, Arsham would be forced to flee, making it easier for them to act. Despite receiving the order to destroy the village, the two still decided to locate Arsham first before launching the attack. Both of them had great respect for Arsham, as she had helped them many times before, so their top priority was ensuring her safety. Meanwhile, Momo went to acknowledge Victor as her father, but for some reason, he insisted that he had no daughter and did not understand what she was saying. That night, the two aliens successfully infiltrated the village, while Yamato and Victor finished cleaning the warehouse and decided to sit down for a break. Yamato was surprised that Victor and his people could stay in such a place without fear of being attacked by aliens, but Victor explained that they feared illness more than they feared an attack. Even though they had an air filtration system, it was only temporary. Victor then asked Yamato if he could bring a certain female alien aboard the ship. Yamato immediately asked Victor what she looked like. Meanwhile, the green-haired defeated subordinate found Arsham, while the other discovered that the queen was also there. The green-haired one then approached Arsham and begged her to return to Grief, but she refused and walked away. When he grabbed her hand to stop her, Victor's group arrived. The green-haired subordinate then ordered the attack to begin. The president detected 20 enemies appearing directly above the village, and the attack commenced. The green-haired one declared that the village had to be destroyed to reclaim Arsham, but if Victor agreed to hand her over, he would cease the assault. However, Arsham still refused, and Victor respected her decision. Victor and the green-haired subordinate then engaged in combat, while the black-haired one went after the queen to eliminate her, but she possessed her own powers and was not weak enough to be defenseless. The president was then forced to order the ship to take off and wait until the battle was over to retrieve the remaining people. Victor and the green-haired subordinate were still evenly matched when the black-haired one arrived in his robot to swiftly finish Victor off, but Arsham piloted Victor's robot to intervene. The green-haired one then decided to transform into his true form and fight Victor at full strength. Victor was shocked to learn that aliens had such an ability, and once the green-haired one reverted to his true form, Victor was no longer able to fight him on equal footing. He was severely beaten and was about to be finished off when the queen arrived and hurled the green-haired subordinate aside. She then asked Victor what his motivation for fighting was, and he responded that he and his people simply wanted to survive. Arsham then used her sword to defeat the black-haired one, telling him to leave because if they continued harming humans, she would no longer see them as her own kind. Arsham then returned to Victor's side, and the queen requested that she go with her. Arsham followed the queen, while Yamato was making his way to the warehouse to retrieve his robot. The command room sent him coordinates, and to his surprise, he reunited with Arsham. He extended his hand, inviting her to go with him, but she had unfinished business and instead ran up to kiss Yamato, promising they would meet again. Yamato then arrived at the warehouse to retrieve his robot, realizing that he had gotten involved with a troublesome girl who wished to unite both worlds. He entered the battlefield and assisted Victor in eliminating some of the enemies. The two aliens decided to retreat once again, as they had failed to bring Arsham back. Yamato invited Victor to board the ship with him, but Victor declined, having found his own path. Meanwhile, Arsham's group suddenly encountered an enemy, and Victor quickly rushed in to take him down, stating that he had to keep his promise to take her to save people. Victor's subordinates also chose to follow him. Although the two defeated subordinates had discovered Arsham's location, they did not want to approach her, fearing that the queen's power might end up destroying them as well. Instead, they decided to sneak aboard the humans' ship to investigate why Arsham had chosen to help humanity. Meanwhile, a new town for refugees had been built right next to the old city where Yamato's group was living. Hughes also came to invite Yamato and the others to visit the new town. At the same time, the two aliens successfully infiltrated the ship and reported back to Grief. He realized that the Queen and Arsham had temporarily set aside their conflict to travel together, and he also noticed that Arsham and Yamato seemed to have developed feelings for each other. He then ordered the two to continue infiltrating and gathering intelligence for him. It was at this point that we learned their names, Yu and Misei. Meanwhile, Yamato's group followed Q's to the new town and found that it was even larger than the city they had been living in. The group entered a restaurant, and just as Q's friend Shizuka ordered a table full of food, she suddenly recognized some familiar faces and ran over to ask how they were doing. However, both Aunt Anna and the boy Ryu no longer remembered her. Teru had to chase after her and explain that the people here had been forced to have their memories altered in order to continue living peacefully. Meanwhile, Yu and Misa were wandering the streets when they were suddenly mistaken for family members by Aunt Anna and Ryu. Assuming that they had been registered under fake identities, the two decided to play along. They then returned to Aunt Anna's home, where she invited them in for dinner. As they began learning more about the human world, they started to notice the differences between humans and other alien species. Their first experience of eating as humans astonished them, as they found the way humans absorbed nutrients to be truly remarkable. Elsewhere, the president convened a meeting with the commanders to announce that they would be reclaiming a fortress from the aliens. Only by doing so could they secure a clear path for their final assault on the enemy's main base. The future of humanity would be in jeopardy if they failed this campaign. Yu and Misa then began closely observing Yamato, knowing that he was one of humanity's strongest warriors. Meanwhile, the president had an analyst present the details of their plan. The fortress they were targeting was surrounded by a magnetic field, meaning they could only infiltrate it from underground. The key to their infiltration was emitting a specific type of magnetic field. From a previous encounter with the fire demon, they learned that he had fired a type of projectile that did not differentiate between friend and foe. Initially, they thought the aliens were willing to sacrifice their own soldiers, but that was not the case. The reason targets were being hit was due to differences in the magnetic fields they emitted. If they could analyze that field, they could create interference waves to prevent the enemy from distinguishing allies from enemies. At this moment, Yamato realized that he might indeed have feelings for Arsham and wondered what he could do to help her. Meanwhile, Momo and Jun visited the bookworm to request permission to return to the cockpit. He revealed that he had created an AI named Wolf to assist Momo in combat. Momo still believed Victor was her father, but she suspected he had a reason for not acknowledging her. Elsewhere, Teru visited the doctor, who took his daughter out of the incubation chamber. Teru decided to name his daughter Marai. Back with Arsham's group, they detected a horde of monsters ahead. Victor wanted to pilot his robot to deal with them, but Arsham insisted he stay and recover. Since the Queen was healing him, moving too far away would interrupt the process and cause him great pain. Understanding this, Victor allowed Arsham to pilot his robot in his stead. Meanwhile, Q's and Shizuka were deployed in robots after receiving a friendly signal. However, they soon entered an area filled with thick smoke, where 3 friendly signals appeared. When the figures emerged, they turned out to be enemy robots. Upon further analysis, they realized these were unmanned units. The enemy had salvaged the wreckage of human robots and modified them into unmanned battlesuits. However, the signals they emitted still registered as friendly, deceiving the humans. Q's retaliated against 2 of them, but left himself exposed, nearly getting hit by the third if not for Shizuka's intervention. Meanwhile, Victor instructed Arsham on how to use the cannon mounted on the robot to repel the monsters. Arsham fired a shot right in front of them, causing the creatures to turn and flee. Victor's subordinates thought she had missed, but Victor understood that Arsham also valued the lives of those creatures. Before long, Arsham's group arrived at the crash site of the alien ship. However, the soldiers stationed there did not recognize her or the Queen. Assuming that she and Victor's group had come to pillage and attack them, Arsham urged them to remain calm, stating that she was there to help. Back on the human side, after analyzing the unmanned robots, they confirmed that the machines were originally from Earth. It seemed likely that their pilots had been captured by the aliens. However, one person raised the possibility that those Earth soldiers had actually defected to the alien side. Meanwhile, in Arsham's camp, the commander of the unit, Bartel, met with the Queen and informed her that he and his soldiers had abandoned their homeland. After dedicating themselves to the war only to suffer defeat, they had been left stranded, forsaken by their own people. He then invited the Queen to try Earth's cuisine. Seeing this, Arsham hoped that her mother would begin to change her perspective on this world. The next morning, Arsham met a soldier named Guide, who recognized her as the princess and identified the Queen. Guide had originally been trained as a royal bodyguard, but had unfortunately fallen to this place alongside his unit. Arsham asked him to keep her identity a secret until the right time. When Guide inquired about her former bodyguard, Arsham revealed that he had sacrificed his life to protect her. Later, Bardo summoned Arsham to show her something. Meanwhile, Guide secretly reported to one of Grief's retainers. This retainer instructed Guide to continue observing for now and not to inform Grief yet. If Arsham truly became a threat, Guide was to eliminate her as soon as possible. Bardo then led Arsham to a site that he and his troops had discovered. He explained that they had converted this place into an arena, as the soldiers here had known only battle since birth. Fighting was their way of rediscovering themselves. Meanwhile, Yu and Misa had to take Ryu to the hospital for a checkup. There, Yu noticed a girl who, despite not being injured, was still staying in the hospital. He advised her to rest if she was sick, but she responded that she was going to die soon, so resting wouldn't make a difference. At the same time, Yamato was lost in thought about Arsham when Kyoka approached him. She admitted that she knew Yamato had fallen for someone else, but simply said she would wait for him to change his mind. Suddenly, an earthquake struck the new city. A fire broke out in the hospital, and upon hearing the news, Yu rushed over to rescue the despairing girl inside. When Misa asked why he would risk himself to save a human, Yu replied that as a knight, he had a duty to protect the weak. The command room then deployed pilots to investigate whether the city was under attack. 4 pilots were sent into battle. Originally, Teru was supposed to participate, but Shizuka volunteered to go in his place. Soon, the enemy began pouring out from a small cave. These creatures resembled moles, and Wolf informed the pilots that underground radar readings would be highly unreliable, so they needed to remain cautious and not rely solely on their sensors to locate the enemy. Meanwhile, Jun started experiencing psychological distress inside the cockpit. Ryuji called in and said he had something to show her. She was then presented with a video of her subordinates celebrating her birthday. It reminded her of events from 2 years ago. Back then, she had been terrified before stepping onto the stage. Her comrades had encouraged her to be confident and go perform, assuring her that even if she failed, they would be there to support her. Those words helped Jun regain her composure. Wolf then instructed Momo and Jun to use swords in combat rather than guns to avoid collapsing the cave. However, Jun still opted to use her gun, confident that she wouldn't miss. She had been practicing her marksmanship for a long time, determined to improve in battle rather than always relying on Momo. Meanwhile, Ryugo had his own approach, drilling into a rock to create a projectile to hurl at the enemy. Shizuka lured enemies into the water and electrocuted them all at once, while Yamato used a hoverboard to close in and take them down. However, the cave soon began to crack, and water started flooding in. The strategist devised a plan, but instead of Yamato, it was meant for Jun and Momo. The two were recharged, and then created a gun that froze both the flowing water and the enemies on the surface. Meanwhile, the Queen acknowledged Arsham's kindness and strength. However, Dimir still believed Arsham lacked the power to stand against their enemies. Long ago, the Queen's homeworld was attacked by an overwhelmingly powerful foe. Knowing that her species was on the brink of extinction, she had a massive ship constructed to evacuate their people. However, she could only save 4% of the population, and so she resolved to find a new world to rebuild their race. To ensure her people's survival, she was willing to exterminate another species if necessary. It had been 3 months since Arsham's group had arrived and integrated into this community, and the queen now believed it was time to establish a nation here. When Arsham noticed Guide preparing to leave, she approached him, hoping he would accompany her on this path. However, Guide had no intention of becoming her bodyguard and refused. Meanwhile, the researcher informed the council that they had gathered 3 data fragments from destroyed shelters. If they could recover 2 more, they would have a complete route to the alien castle. However, seizing the fortress remained a necessity. The researcher and the chairman then met with the pilots to brief them on the plan to take the fortress. The initial step was to divide into 3 groups and land on the ground to approach the stronghold. Yamato knew that the enemy would throw everything they had to stop them, so they planned to use a jamming signal. This signal would cause the enemy to go berserk, rendering them unable to distinguish friend from foe, like zombies. Meanwhile, Grief summoned Guide. He revealed that he knew Guide had a brother who was a traitor, though Guide denied having any sibling. Grief wanted to test Guide and disclosed that he himself had killed Guide's brother. He wanted to see whether Guide harbored any resentment, but Guide showed no reaction. Satisfied, Grief assigned Guide to a unit tasked with fighting against the humans. At the same time, Yu and Misa had been trailing a scientist and discovered that the humans had a child who was a hybrid between Earth's people and aliens. Once the scientist left, they examined the child and realized that this could be the key to their species' evolution. However, just then, Teru arrived, forcing Yu and Misa to hide. In their haste, they dropped their communication device. When Teru visited his daughter, he accidentally found the lost device, which made him suspect that Mirai's existence had been discovered by the aliens. Fearing for her safety, he immediately took Mirai and fled. Yu and Misa decided not to report this to Grief yet. If Grief learned that they had let the target escape, they would be punished. Teru later took Mirai to a nursery to be cared for in his stead. Meanwhile, the other pilots were enjoying their personal lives. Yu and Misa then met with Dr. Anna and Ryu to say their farewells, as they had been ordered to intercept the human forces before their attack on the fortress. For the first time, the 2 experienced human emotions and began to question whether they should continue fighting against humanity. Meanwhile, both Guide and Vals had arrived at the fortress. The pilots were set to assault, joining its garrison. Elsewhere, Teru led Yamato and Ryugo to the nursery, where he finally revealed to them that he had a daughter with Minami. Teru hoped that this child would serve as a bridge between the 2 worlds. Yamato believed Teru's words, trusting him because he wasn't the kind of person who would casually share such information with his friends. Meanwhile, Yu and Misa had discovered that the child they were looking for was here, but they knew they needed to focus on their mission for now. However, they had not been taught how to hack into the ship system, which led Yu to suspect that their superiors intended to use them as bombs to destroy the ship from within, as they had already been implanted with self-destruct devices. Before the mission, Yu wanted to visit a certain place. He went to the hospital to say goodbye to the little girl, as he might not return the girl. Knowing Yu was heading to the battlefield, ran to stop him soon after. Soon after, the ship officially approached the enemy's fortress, and the pilots were quickly deployed for battle. The robots were equipped to interfere with the enemy's recognition signals. Teru reminded everyone that the signal would cause the enemy to attack indiscriminately, meaning they could still be targeted. All pilots and robots were in battle, and at the same time, Arsham gathered the community to announce that she wanted to create a new path for her people. She envisioned a life of joy for her kind, like the one in this community, rather than focusing solely on strengthening their military. Her announcement was met with overwhelming support. Meanwhile, the pilots successfully split into 3 teams to begin their assault. The enemy quickly surged to block their path, but they could not remain hiding for long. The pilots charged forward, and soon they succeeded in breaking into the fortress. However, Yamato's team was the first to be surrounded. Realizing it was the perfect moment to use the jamming signal, Ryugo was still unsure if it would work. But once they stepped onto the battlefield, they were ready to risk their lives. Fortunately, luck was on their side, as the enemy, hit by the signal, immediately turned on each other and began firing randomly. Meanwhile, Yu and Misa had returned to the fortress. Neither of them believed they should fight against humanity, as they disliked the idea of their people using violence to dominate others. Yu soon discovered that the best pilot of the fortress had entered a robot to join the battle. Both Yu and Misa were puzzled by how, despite humanity's inferior technology, they had managed to hold their own until now. Vals approached and explained that they had once had a traitor in their ranks. Vals also wondered why they hadn't destroyed the human ship as ordered. Yu and Misa replied that they weren't pawns for him, and they were forgiven for disobeying the orders this time, with the commander urging them to join the battle soon. Later, Guide met with the commander of the fortress, who wanted him to quickly enter the battle. The commander was curious to see the strength of the fortress and chose to ignore the human attack for now. The 4 key members of the alien faction also entered the battle, and Yamato immediately realized that the enemy could still fly within the fortress's magnetic field. Yamato wanted to test whether he could fly, so he fired a few shots to observe how the flying enemies dodged, then used his thrusters to ascend and strike them down. He realized that they could indeed fly, albeit briefly, to take down airborne foes. Yamato quickly recognized the 2 enemies he had just knocked down as familiar opponents Yu and Misei. Yu and Misei, realizing they needed some time to repair their robots after the blow from Yamato, decided to hold out as best they could. Meanwhile, Q's team encountered an old foe, the fire demon, who fired homing bullets at them. They had to stand still to avoid getting hit, which made it impossible for them to fight back. Shizuka suddenly came up with an idea and deployed a small drone. The bullet, however, didn't chase after the drone. She used it to lure an enemy to approach, and the bullets then followed the enemy. The fire demon, more specifically, Guide observed the pilot's clever tactic and decided to join the fray, launching an attack and charging into battle. Meanwhile, Ryuji's team encountered the best pilot of the fortress, whom they had dubbed Satan. His scythe could unleash plasma waves capable of cutting through anything, so they had to dodge it at all costs. Ryuji attempted to block with a shield, but it was instantly sliced in half. Satan descended and severed Ryuji's arm, but he quickly used his powers to avoid the finishing blow. Ryuji retaliated and broke Satan's scythe, forcing him to draw a sword. However, Satan unexpectedly withdrew. Yamato also reported that his enemy had withdrawn in a strange manner. Despite knowing the enemy had some plan, the team pressed on. Sure enough, the enemy had a plot, as all 4 of their pilots gathered in one spot. The base then supplied Yamato with fuel, allowing him to activate a new move summoning the demon sword. Yamato summoned a sword and began to channel energy into it, forming a demon sword, which he quickly swung to destroy the fortress. But to his surprise, the fortress dodged the attack and transformed into a massive robot. The fortress started retaliating, forcing Yamato to use his sword to shield the team. The team found themselves in a difficult situation, so the command center ordered a retreat. However, just as they turned to retreat, Satan and Guide blocked their escape. Ryuji wanted to force a breakthrough, but unexpectedly, Wolf urged Momo not to give up, as they still had a way to change the tide. Momo realized that Wolf somewhat resembled her father, so she contacted the captain to ask him and everyone else to buy her some time. Momo informed the team, and they began to suspect that Wolf might not be an ordinary AI, deciding to trust Momo. The president, meanwhile, was unaware of why the pilots kept fighting. However, a few minutes later, a barrage of bullets struck the fortress, and a ship appeared from the sky. The enemy realized that this ship, capable of flying within the fortress's magnetic field, was not human-made. Arsham immediately spoke up, declaring that she represented the unity between the 2 races and had come to end the war. To achieve this goal, she would support the human faction. Guide now understood his late brother's intentions, that his brother had predicted Arsham would be the one to rule and change everything. Victor and his army then entered the fray. Victor called Momo to apologize, promising to explain everything after returning. Arsham then noticed that the fortress had no intention of ceasing combat and ordered a full assault from her forces. Yamato's team saw that the opportunity to turn the tide had arrived and continued to fight. All pilots regained their fighting spirit. The president also ordered the entire ship to enter battle mode and advance to support the forces. The fortress continued to retaliate, so the president planned to deliver a powerful blow to destroy the massive cannon at the center of the fortress. However, hitting a moving target like that would be difficult, so Frizzy Hair called to request Ryugo, and Yamato prepared to destroy the fortress's legs to force it to stop. The human faction ship began charging its energy. Ryugo was sent to a massive drill, which he used to quickly bore a hole to release lava. Yamato was sent a device that allowed him to siphon the lava and turn it into a whip to slash and sever the fortress's ability to move. The human ship seized the opportunity and fired the massive cannon, obliterating the fortress. The operation was a success, and the president ordered everyone to return to the ship. The ship then established a connection with Arsham's vessel, and she informed the command center. Meanwhile, Vals returned to report the result to Grief. Grief decided to meet Arsham in person to try and bring her back by any means necessary. Vals began preparing for Grief's trip and soon encountered Arsham's former bodyguard, who also happened to be Guide's older brother. The bodyguard believed that Grief's path was not what Arsham wanted, but Grief refused to listen. Vals has informed Guide that from now on, he will follow his orders instead of those from Grief. Arsham and Victor, now part of the same team, headed to the human faction ship to meet the president. As stated in her previous message, she seeks cooperation between both sides and the unification of the two planets. She admits that the crimes her people have committed against Earth are unforgivable, but she does not want to continue senseless killing. She vows to work hard to restore Earth. The president temporarily accepts her offer and welcomes her aboard the ship. Arsham then meets with Yamato, while Victor reconnects with his daughter, Momo. She scolds him for not returning sooner. Victor didn't want Momo to know that she had a father outside, as he feared she would try to find him. He believed this was the right decision, as Momo had found happiness here. Arsham and Yamato sit down to talk. Yamato reveals that not long ago, he still hated the alien race until he met her. Arsham, in turn, realizes that humans are not as barbaric as her mother had described. Although they are now cooperating, there are still those who do not accept alien soldiers aboard the ship. However, Arsham will try to prevent any conflicts. She also does not wish for Yamato's hatred to completely disappear. Yamato then takes Arsham to meet Teru's daughter, Mirai, and explains that this child is the hope for peaceful coexistence between the races. Arsham promises to do her best to help the child grow up in peace. Teru realizes that this child is the angel of hope that Minami had placed his trust in. For various reasons, the movie will have to end here. The creators sincerely apologize for this incomplete experience. However, this movie was made to promote a game, so viewers can try out the game to continue the story and see where it goes. And now, it's time to say goodbye.